The city bowed to him without knowing his name. From the top floor of a glass tower that cut through the clouds, the billionaire looked down at the world like a chessboard. Cars moved like tiny pieces. People hurried like they mattered. To him, they were numbers, profits, losses, risks. Everything could be measured. Everything could be owned. He stood alone in his office, surrounded by walls of glass, steel, and silence. The room was bigger than most houses, filled with rare art and expensive furniture chosen by experts. Yet nothing in it felt warm. Nothing felt lived in. The space reflected him perfectly, impressive, controlled, and empty. He had built his empire from nothing. That was the story everyone admired. Magazines called him ruthless but brilliant. Business rivals feared him. Employees respected him but never loved him. He liked it that way. Love made people weak. Fear made them useful. To him, life was simple. Everything had a price. Loyalty could be bought. Silence could be bought. Even smiles could be bought if the number was high enough. He had tested this belief again and again, and the world had proven him right every time. When people spoke to him, their eyes always changed. First confidence, then caution, then need. He recognized that look well. It was the look of someone ready to sell a part of themselves. That knowledge made him feel powerful, but it also made him feel alone. He never admitted that part. At night, when the city lights blinked like distant stars, he sometimes felt a strange pressure in his chest. Not pain, something heavier, something quiet. He would pour himself a drink and tell himself it was just exhaustion. Feelings were distractions. He had buried his long ago, the day he learned that trusting people only led to loss. Control was safer. That was why he loved games. Business deals felt too easy now, too predictable. So he turned people into challenges, situations into bets. He enjoyed watching cause and effect play out, enjoyed proving that emotions could be pushed, pulled, and broken with the right moves. Among the elite, stories followed him like shadows. Stories of how he ruined rivals with a smile, how he tested people just to see how far they would bend, how he once made a man choose between pride and survival, and won. He never lost sleep over those stories. In his mind, the world was cruel long before he became rich. He had simply learned how to survive it better than others. Still, when the office lights dimmed and the building grew quiet, the silence pressed closer. There was no laughter in his life, no voice calling his name with warmth. Just assistants, lawyers, and strangers who wanted something from him. He told himself that was the price of greatness. Yet, deep down, buried beneath years of control and calculation, was a wound he never touched. A memory of being powerless, of being ignored, of promising himself that no one would ever have power over him again. That promise shaped everything he became. Now, standing above the city, he felt the familiar itch, the need for something new, something challenging, something to remind him that he was still in control. He didn't know it yet, but that hunger would soon lead him to make a careless choice. A simple bet, one that felt harmless in the moment. A bet that would slowly expose the emptiness he had hidden for years and change his life in ways money could never fix. The game was about to begin. The idea came to him the way most dangerous ideas do, quietly, without warning, and wrapped in confidence. It was late evening when he left his office and entered a private lounge reserved for men like him. The room was filled with low voices, soft music, and people who believed the world belonged to them. Laughter floated easily, careless, and sharp. They talked about markets, takeovers, and people's lives as if all of it were a game. He listened more than he spoke. He always did. Someone mentioned a story about a woman who refused help, who walked away from an easy way out even when life pressed her hard. The others laughed, shaking their heads, calling it foolish pride. To them, survival mattered more than principles. That was when he smiled. He leaned back, calm and amused, and spoke as if stating a simple fact. People like her didn't refuse help because they were strong, he said. They refused because no one had offered them the right price yet. Everyone had a breaking point. Everyone could be moved, shaped, redirected. The room went quiet for a moment. A few men challenged him. not because they disagreed, but because they wanted to see him prove it. They had seen him win before. They enjoyed watching him turn confidence into certainty. And so the bet was made. It was casual, almost playful. No contracts, no raised voices, just a quiet agreement wrapped in arrogance. He would take a woman who believed in hard work and dignity and change her life completely. Not with force, but with opportunity, with pressure disguised as kindness. He would prove that values bent when comfort stood on the other side. The woman at the center of the bet didn't even know his name. She lived a simple, difficult life. Every day was a test of endurance. She worked long hours, saved carefully, and refused shortcuts that felt wrong. Life had not been kind to her, yet she carried herself with quiet strength. She did not beg. She did not complain. She believed effort mattered, even when the results were slow. That belief irritated him. From a distance, he observed her like a puzzle. He learned her routines, her struggles, her limits. Not out of care, but curiosity. To him, she wasn't a person yet. She was a theory waiting to be proven wrong. What he saw confused him. She struggled, yet she smiled. She was tired, yet she kept going. When faced with easy escapes, she chose the harder road. It made no sense to him. In his world, people did what benefited them most. That was the rule, and rules could not be broken, only tested. He told himself this was just another experiment, another lesson about human nature. He was not cruel, he believed. He was honest. The world was unfair, and he simply showed people the truth faster than life would. So he began carefully. Small changes, gentle pushes, opportunities that appear at the right time in the right way. He watched how she reacted. Every refusal amused him. Every hesitation fed his confidence. He felt in control long before she ever noticed his presence. To him, she was a challenge, a stubborn lock that needed the correct key. What he didn't see, what he chose not to see, was her humanity, her fear, her hope, the quiet pride that kept her standing when the world tried to bend her. His wealth protected him from guilt. His success blinded him to consequences. He believed he was offering her a better life, whether she wanted it or not. In his mind, the bet was already won. As he looked out at the city that night, lights stretching endlessly below, he felt that familiar rush. The thrill of control. The promise of victory. Another story to add to his collection. He didn't realize he had just crossed a line that money could not erase. The game had started, but this time, the rules would not obey him. The first change in her life felt like coincidence. A problem she had worried about for weeks suddenly eased. A door that had stayed closed for years opened just enough for her to step through. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't magical. It was subtle, almost believable. She noticed it, but she didn't celebrate. Instead, she grew careful. She had learned early that easy things often came with hidden costs. Life had taught her that nothing arrived without taking something in return. So when help appeared without a clear face or reason, her instincts warned her to be alert. Still, she needed it. Every day was a balance between pride and survival. Bills waited. Time moved faster than hope. She told herself that accepting a small opportunity did not mean giving up who she was. It was just a step forward, just a chance to breathe. From a distance, he watched. He never stepped into her world directly. He stayed in the shadows, pulling strings that could not be seen. A recommendation here, a delay removed there. Each move was planned, careful, and quiet. He did not rush. He enjoyed the slow build. To him, this was strategy. He studied her reactions the way others studied charts and numbers. When she hesitated, he noted it. When she accepted, he smiled. Every emotion she showed became proof that his theory was working. Fear, relief, gratitude, doubt. He tracked them all. She told herself she was lucky. Yet something felt wrong. The opportunities came too neatly, too perfectly timed. When she asked questions, answers were vague. When she tried to trace the source, the path disappeared. She felt as if an unseen hand was guiding her forward, gently but firmly. It scared her. At night, she lay awake wondering if she was losing control of her own life. She had always believed in earning her way, in standing on her own feet. Now, each step felt supported by something she could not see. And still she kept going. Because desperation has a quiet voice. It does not scream. It whispers. It tells you to accept help just this once. It promises that you will regain control later. He noticed that too. What surprised him was her resistance. Most people softened quickly when life became easier. They relaxed. They stopped questioning. She didn't. Even as her situation improved, her eyes stayed sharp. Her pride stayed intact. That fascinated him. He had expected gratitude, dependence, maybe even admiration. Instead, he saw caution mixed with strength. She didn't lean into comfort. She stood upright, as if ready to walk away at any moment. The bet began to feel less certain. He adjusted his approach. Offer more, but never too much. Enough to tempt, not enough to reveal him. He told himself he was still in control, but something had shifted. He found himself thinking about her when the game paused, wondering what she would do next. That annoyed him. He reminded himself that she was part of an experiment, nothing more. He had done this before. People always changed when pressure met opportunity. Always. Yet with her, the change was different. She didn't become smaller or weaker. She became stronger, more confident. The help meant to guide her began to sharpen her instead. She used every chance to build herself, not to rely on anyone else. For the first time, he questioned his own methods. She felt it too, the tightening line between help and control, the pressure beneath the kindness. She sensed that someone expected something from her, even if they hadn't asked yet. It made her uneasy. It made her angry. But walking away now would mean losing everything she had just gained. So she stayed. Between pride and survival, she chose survival, but not without cost. Each step forward pulled her slightly away from the version of herself she trusted most. Each compromise felt small, yet they stacked quietly, one on top of another. He watched that struggle closely, and somewhere in that watching, the game stopped being just a bet. It became personal. As she moved forward, stronger yet uncertain, he realized he was no longer only shaping her path. He was waiting to see who she would become. And that realization unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The lines were blurring. The game was no longer clean, and neither of them could turn back now. He told himself nothing had changed. The bet was still on. The rules were still clear. He was still in control, yet his nights grew longer. He found himself watching the city from his office long after the lights in other towers went dark. The glass reflected his face back at him. Calm, unreadable, practiced. But behind that calm, something restless stirred. A thought he did not invite. A name he did not say aloud. Her. He had not planned for this part. He had expected results, not feelings. Curiosity, not concern. Yet now, small moments stayed with him. The way she handled pressure. The way she refused to lean on anyone, even when life gave her a reason to. It both irritated and impressed him. Her independence felt like defiance. Every time she solved a problem on her own, something inside him tightened. Not anger, not pride, something closer to fear. He realized, slowly, that his influence over her was not absolute. That frightened him more than he wanted to admit. For the first time in years, his control had limits. He noticed it when one of his plans failed. A door he expected her to walk through remained closed. She chose another path, harder, slower, but fully her own. The result shocked him. He had calculated every outcome. This one did not fit. He replayed it in his mind again and again, searching for the mistake. There was none. She had simply refused to be shaped. That night, he poured himself a drink and let it sit untouched. His thoughts circled a single question. Why did it bother him so much? He had lost bets before. Small ones. They never stayed with him. This did. He told himself he was adjusting strategy. That he needed to stay closer to the situation to understand it better. That was all. Practical. Logical. But logic did not explain why he began finding reasons to watch her more closely. Why he noticed details that had nothing to do with the bet. The tired strength in her eyes. The quiet pride in her posture. The way she stood her ground without raising her voice. He justified it easily. Closer observation led to better control. Better outcomes. Still, something felt wrong. When she succeeded without his help, he felt an unexpected sting. When others noticed her growth, something dark flickered in his chest. He dismissed it as irritation, but it returned again and again, sharper each time. Jealousy, he would never call it. Possessiveness crept in quietly. He wanted to be the reason she moved forward, the hand behind every door that opened, the shadow she depended on, even if she never saw him. That desire unsettled him. He had never needed to be seen before. Power worked best in silence. Yet now, the idea that she might succeed without him felt like losing something he never owned. And that frightened him most of all. She, on the other hand, felt the pressure change. The help around her grew heavier, closer. The space she once had to breathe felt narrower. She sensed expectations forming where none had existed before. It made her uneasy. She pushed back gently, choosing independence whenever she could. Each time she did, the tension deepened. He told himself he was protecting his investment, that walking away now would make everything meaningless. But deep inside, another truth stirred, one he refused to face. This was no longer about winning. It was about not losing her. The thought hit him late one night, sharp and unwanted. He sat in the silence and felt something he had avoided his whole life: exposure. The risk of caring, the risk of needing. He clenched his jaw and pushed the feeling down. He was not that man. He did not need anyone. Yet as he stared out at the city, he realized control no longer brought him peace. It brought fear. Fear that the one thing he couldn't buy, couldn't bend, was slipping beyond his reach. For the first time, the armor he had built began to crack. And through those cracks, something dangerous entered. Change did not come to her in a single moment. It came quietly, through effort, through long days that tested her limits and nights that forced her to think. Each opportunity she accepted became a tool, not a shelter. She worked harder than ever, refusing to let comfort weaken her resolve. Where others might have leaned back, she leaned forward, and slowly she began to change. Her confidence did not come from praise or ease. It came from knowing she could stand on her own, even when the ground shook. She learned new skills, faced challenges she once feared, and discovered strength she didn't know she carried. Every small victory reminded her of who she was before life tried to shrink her. She started trusting her voice again. With that confidence came questions. The more she grew, the more she noticed the strange pattern beneath her success. Doors opened before she knocked. Problems disappeared too quickly. People treated her as if they expected something from her, though no one asked outright. It made her uneasy. She had fought too hard to give her power away now. Late one evening, she sat alone, thinking back on every step that had brought her here. The timing felt wrong. Too perfect. She realized then that accepting help without understanding its source was no different than surrendering control. That thought burned. She began to ask careful questions, not accusing, just curious. When answers stayed vague, her suspicion deepened. She didn't confront anyone. She didn't panic. She simply adjusted, choosing paths that depended less on unseen favors and more on her own effort. From the shadows, he watched the shift. At first, he felt pride. This was part of the plan, he told himself. Growth meant progress. But that pride quickly turned uneasy. She was growing beyond his reach. Not into the version he imagined, but into something stronger, sharper, and less predictable. She no longer waited. Where she once hesitated, she now decided. Where she once accepted guidance, she now set boundaries. Each independent choice felt like a quiet rebellion, and he felt it as a personal loss. His influence weakened. That frightened him. He tried to remind himself that this was still his game, that he had placed the pieces and controlled the board. Yet the more she stepped into herself, the less she needed any hidden hand. She stopped fitting the role he had designed. She was no longer a woman shaped by opportunity. She was a woman shaping her own future, and that truth unsettled him deeply. She felt it too, the moment her fear shifted into clarity. She no longer felt small in rooms where she once doubted herself. She spoke with calm strength. She claimed space without apology. The life she was building finally felt like her own. For the first time, she saw her reflection and recognized the woman staring back. Strong, capable, unafraid. That sense of self became her shield. When pressure came, she resisted. When comfort tempted her to relax, she pushed harder. She refused to let anyone rewrite her story. From his side, the bet began to unravel. What was meant to prove his power now revealed its limits. He realized he could not control someone who refused to surrender herself. His money opened doors, but it could not shape her will. The more independent she became, the more he felt the ground shift beneath him. The rules he trusted no longer applied. His confidence wavered, and in that uncertainty, something dangerous grew. Not anger, fear. Fear of losing the one thing he could not own. He watched her walk forward without looking back, and for the first time, he understood what it meant to be unnecessary. She had reclaimed her identity, and in doing so, she took something from him he didn't know how to replace: his sense of control. As she stepped fully into her strength, the distance between them widened. The game he started was slipping through his fingers. The bet was no longer his to win, and ahead, waiting just beyond her growth, was a truth neither of them was ready to face. The bet no longer mattered. He realized that one quiet morning, standing alone in his office as sunlight crept across the floor. The numbers on his screen meant nothing. The challenge that once excited him felt distant and hollow. His thoughts were fixed on a single fear, one he had never allowed himself to feel before. Losing her, not the game, not the proof. Her. The truth unsettled him. He had spent his life winning by detaching himself from outcomes. Care was a weakness. Yet now, the idea of her walking away tightened his chest in a way no business loss ever had. He told himself it was temporary, a passing distraction, but the feeling only grew stronger. Memories he had buried long ago began to surface. The loneliness of his early years. The moment he learned that people left when you needed them most. The promise he made to himself to never need anyone again. He had built his empire on that promise. Now it was breaking. He watched her more closely than ever, not to control outcomes, but to feel near her. When she smiled, something eased inside him. When she grew distant, panic rose fast and sharp. He mistook that fear for care, and that mistake changed everything. He began making choices he once would have laughed at, adjusting plans to cross her path, creating reasons to stay involved when there was no reason left. He told himself he was protecting her from harm, from setbacks, from people who might use her. But the truth was simpler and darker. He was afraid of being replaced. Every step she took on her own felt like a step away from him. Her strength, once fascinating, now terrified him. He wanted to be needed, to matter, to be the one constant in her life. That need turned his power reckless. People around him noticed the change. Meetings were cut short. Decisions rushed. Old allies questioned his focus. He dismissed them all. None of it mattered if she slipped beyond his reach. The more he tried to hold on, the more isolated he became. His world, once crowded with influence and control, began to shrink. The tools that had built his empire now boxed him in. Power no longer protected him. It exposed him. At night, he felt the weight of his obsession. He replayed moments, searched for signs, imagined losses that hadn't happened yet. Sleep came rarely. When it did, it brought dreams of being abandoned, left standing in empty rooms he could not buy his way out of. He called it love. But love does not demand control. Deep down, he sensed the truth. What he felt was not care. It was fear. Fear of being invisible. Fear of losing the one person who made him feel something real. That fear made him dangerous. She felt the shift immediately. The space she had fought to create began closing again. His presence pressed in from all sides, subtle but heavy. The same help that once felt distant now felt watchful. It made her uneasy. She pulled back. That distance struck him like a threat. Instead of stepping away, he tightened his grip. Offer more. Promise stability. Try to become impossible to leave. He believed proximity would secure her place in his life. But closeness without freedom only breeds resistance. His power, once admired, now isolated him further. The more he pushed, the more alone he became. He stood at the center of his vast world, surrounded by wealth, yet trapped by his own fear. And for the first time, he faced a question he could not escape. Did he want her happiness or his comfort? The answer terrified him. As he stood on the edge of his own unraveling, one truth became clear. Obsession had replaced control, and control had never been love. Ahead lay a reckoning he could no longer avoid. And when it came, it would cost him more than he was prepared to lose. The truth did not arrive gently. It came in pieces, small, sharp moments that refused to be ignored. A name mentioned too carefully. A document that didn't make sense. A quiet pause where honesty should have been. Each detail struck her like a warning, until the picture became impossible to deny. Someone had been guiding her life. Her hands trembled as the final proof settled in her mind. The opportunities, the timing, the invisible help. It all led back to him. Not by accident, not by fate, by design. Her breath grew shallow as understanding crashed over her. What she had thought was luck had been a setup. What she had believed was her own struggle had been watched, measured, and used. A bet. The word burned. She replayed every difficult moment, every choice she made when she felt weak, every night she doubted herself. All of it had been part of someone else's game. Her pain had been entertainment. Her growth, a challenge. Her sense of reality shattered. She felt exposed, stripped of dignity she had fought so hard to protect. The strength she had built suddenly felt questioned, not because it wasn't real, but because it had been tested without her consent. Tears filled her eyes, not from weakness, but from humiliation. She confronted the truth alone, sitting in silence as the weight of it crushed her chest. Anger followed quickly, sharp and clean. Not just anger at him, but anger at herself for trusting what felt wrong all along. When she finally stood, her decision was clear. She would not beg. She would not explain. She would not allow him another moment of control. She walked away, not dramatically, not loudly, just firmly, choosing dignity over comfort, truth over illusion. Every step felt heavy, but right. She left behind the life that had been shaped without her permission, even if it meant starting over. From his side, the fallout was immediate. He saw the distance before he understood the reason. Her silence was louder than any accusation. When the truth reached him, when he realized she knew, something inside him collapsed. This was not part of the plan. He tried to justify himself, even then. He told himself he had helped her, that she was stronger because of him, that intentions mattered more than methods. But none of that softened the truth. He had taken her choices away. For the first time, his power brought no comfort. It turned on him, reflecting his cruelty back in full. The game he had designed exposed him instead. He felt the weight of what he had done settle deep in his chest. The fear, the manipulation, the arrogance, all of it stood bare. And she was gone. The loss hit harder than he expected. Not like a business failure, not like a missed deal. This was personal. This was final. He stood alone in the world he had built, surrounded by wealth that now felt meaningless. The silence that followed her departure was unbearable. He had crossed a line he could not erase. And for the first time in his life, he faced the truth he had avoided for years. Control without respect is cruelty, and power without empathy destroys everything it touches. The game was over, and he had lost far more than a bet. The silence was louder than any crowd. His world continued to move. Phones rang, meetings waited, money flowed, but none of it reached him anymore. The empire he had built stood tall around him, yet it felt hollow, like an empty shell. Every room reminded him of what was missing. Her absence. He had lost deals before. He had crushed rivals and survived failures. None of it prepared him for this emptiness. The space she left behind followed him everywhere, settling into corners of his life he never knew existed. The obsession that once drove him now turned inward. Guilt crept in slowly, then all at once. It replayed his actions without mercy. The lies he told himself, the choices he made in the name of control. He could no longer hide behind logic or success. The truth stood clear and unforgiving. He had used her, not for money, not for power, for his own fear. That realization cut deeper than any loss he had known. For the first time, he allowed himself to look inward. He saw the boy he once was, alone, unheard, desperate to never feel powerless again. He understood how that fear had shaped him into a man who controlled instead of trusted, who manipulated instead of loved. The armor he wore for years fell apart. He realized then that power could buy silence, loyalty, even admiration, but it could not heal emotional wounds. It could not replace respect, and it could not bring back someone who chose dignity over comfort. He had believed control meant safety. Now, he saw it meant isolation. The weight of that truth crushed him. He felt smaller than he ever had, standing in rooms designed to make him feel powerful. The identity he had built, fearless, untouchable, superior, no longer fit. Who was he without control? Without her, he faced a loss he could not reverse. There was no negotiation, no deal, no strategy that could undo what he had done. The finality of it left him exposed. And in that exposure, something shifted. He stopped running. He accepted the pain instead of pushing it away. He sat with the regret, letting it teach him what his success never had. The loneliness, the accountability, the cost of treating people like pieces instead of souls. This was real loss, not the kind you recover from with effort or money, the kind that changes you or destroys you. As he stood at the edge of his collapse, one truth became clear. He could no longer live the way he had before. The man he had been could not carry him forward. Something had to change. And ahead, beyond the guilt and the ruins of his old self, waited the hardest path of all, redemption. He didn't know if he deserved it, but for the first time, he knew he needed it. The first step toward redemption was silence. He did not storm in with wealth or gifts. He did not try to explain himself or demand forgiveness. He only came quietly, carrying the weight of his mistakes like a cloak he could no longer shrug off. Power had failed him. Arrogance had failed him. Only honesty remained, and even that was fragile. When he found her, she did not run, but she did not smile either. Her eyes were guarded, steady, full of the strength he had never allowed himself to admire before. She had grown beyond his influence, beyond his expectations. She carried herself with dignity, and each movement reminded him of the cost of his obsession. He swallowed the words he wanted to say, the excuses he wanted to offer. Instead, he spoke simply, carefully, not to control, not to impress, not to bargain, but to acknowledge, to accept responsibility without asking for absolution. "I was wrong," he said. "I let fear and pride decide for both of us. I treated your life like a game, and there is nothing I can say to undo that. I can only try to be better." She listened, but her face did not soften. She had learned that apologies did not erase pain. She had rebuilt herself on struggle and choice. Forgiveness, she knew, would not come from his words. It would have to come from her own decision. He waited, feeling every second stretch like a test of patience he had never needed before. Each pause reminded him that he could no longer control outcomes with money or influence. This was not a bet, not a game. This was reality. Humble, unshakable, demanding. For her, the path forward was clear. She could accept his apology, reject it, or remain cautious. The power dynamic that had once defined them was gone. She had earned her own future. He had only earned the right to witness it without interference. The air between them was thick with unsaid things, regret, pride, longing, but also possibility. He saw her not as a prize, but as a person whose life he had once tried to bend. And for the first time, he felt the responsibility of that knowledge rather than the thrill of control. "I can't promise forgiveness," she said finally, her voice calm, measured. "But I can promise this. I won't let anyone take my choices again." He nodded, absorbing the truth in her words. He could not buy her trust. He could not demand it. All he could do was walk beside it, quietly, with respect. The story did not end with fireworks or perfect resolution. It ended with a chance, a real, fragile chance. Redemption was not handed to him by wealth, by influence, or by a clever plan. It came through humility, through facing himself, through the long and painful work of change. He left that day changed. Not complete, not forgiven, but aware. The hard truth was that growth takes time, and trust cannot be forced. And somewhere in that awareness, he found the smallest, most difficult spark of hope. A hope earned, not bought. The game was over. Life had begun, and this time he would have to live it honestly,